My name is Lieutenant Esi Hammond. I am 29 years old. I have been a combat engineer for 6 years, and on a Monday morning in July, I read the official report into the training accident that had killed 2 soldiers from my unit and had left me the only survivor, and I found in it a detail that proved I had not been where the report said I was. The report cleared everyone: my commanding officer, the training supervisors, the safety officer on duty, me. Accidental death, equipment failure, no negligence, no fault attributable to any individual. I had been waiting 3 weeks for that report, 3 weeks in a medical facility while my knee healed and the investigation ran its course. 3 weeks of thinking about Corporal Felix and Private Sandra and the morning that had ended with 2 people dead and me pulled from rubble with a fractured knee and a question I could not answer. What had actually happened? The report said it was an accident. The report also said I had been at position Alpha the entire time. The report had been written by someone who did not know where I was, which meant the report had been written by someone who was not there. Let me tell you about the accident first. The exercise had been a standard structural assessment, a decommissioned building on the base used for engineering training. 3 of us assigned to assess load-bearing capacity on the upper floors: Felix, Sandra, me. We had done this kind of exercise many times. It was methodical work. You move through the structure, you assess, you document, you flag anything that requires attention. The exercise had assigned each of us a section. Felix and Sandra had been assigned the upper floor eastern section. I had been assigned the western wall of the same floor. Our sections were adjacent. The compromised support was in the eastern section. On this morning, I had been on the upper floor assessing the western wall when I heard it. Not a crack, not a groan, something beneath those sounds, a settling that felt wrong in a way I had no precise language for but recognized immediately. I had called out to Felix and Sandra. I had told them I was moving to Bravo and they should follow. Felix had said he would be with me in 2 minutes. He had one more measurement to take. Sandra had not answered. She had been further into the eastern section. I had moved to position Bravo. 8 minutes later, the floor section where Felix and Sandra had been working gave way. I had been behind the concrete partition when it happened. The partition had held. I had been buried in secondary debris, a fractured knee, significant bruising, nothing that would not heal. Felix and Sandra had not had a partition between them and the collapse. I had survived because I moved, and the report said I had been at position Alpha the entire time. The object at the center of everything was the report itself. 22 pages, appendices, witness statements from the training supervisors who had been outside the building, a structural engineering assessment from a civilian contractor brought in after the accident. I had read it 3 times before I found the detail. Page 14. A timeline of events as reconstructed by the investigating officer. My movements logged as position Alpha from 0847 to 0923, the collapse occurring at 0919. I had moved to position Bravo at 0911. The report had me at Alpha at 0919. I knew this because I had looked at my watch when I heard the sound. I had noted the time the way I had been trained to note time in situations that might require a later account. 0911, movement to Bravo. 0919, the structure came down. My watch, my memory, my training, against a report that placed me 8 minutes and 40 meters away from where I actually was. Someone had reconstructed my movements incorrectly. The question was whether they had done so from incomplete information or from a deliberate decision to put me somewhere I had not been. I did not call anyone immediately. I sat with the report in my lap in the medical facility on a Monday morning, and I thought about what the difference between those 2 possibilities meant. Incomplete information would mean the investigating officer had relied on witness accounts that were themselves inaccurate. The training supervisors had been outside. They could not have seen my position at 0919. Their accounts of my movements would have been based on what they knew before the collapse, which was that I had started the exercise in the general area of the upper floor. Position Alpha had been my starting point. They may simply have assumed I had stayed there. That was possible. But there was a second possibility. If the report had placed me at position Alpha deliberately, knowing I had been at Bravo, then the report was not a reconstruction based on incomplete information. It was a fabrication. And if it had been deliberately fabricated, if the report had been constructed to account for 3 people in the collapse zone rather than 2, if my survival had not been part of the plan, then placing me at Alpha served a purpose beyond administrative error. At Alpha, I would have been in the collapse zone. At Alpha, there would have been no survivor. I sat with that for a long time. Then I called Colonel Agnes Wiredu.
Wiredu answered on the second ring. I told her in 5 sentences. Official report received this morning. Report places me at position Alpha at time of collapse. I was at position Bravo. The difference is 40 meters and a concrete partition. The partition is why I survived. She was quiet for 9 seconds. Then she asked one question. She asked, "Is there any documentation of your movement to Bravo?" I said, "My watch says 0911, and I told Felix I was moving." He acknowledged. She said, "Felix is gone." I said, "Yes, but Sandra was further in the eastern section. She may not have heard me. The supervisors outside would not have seen me move. The only person who knew I went to Bravo at 0911 is dead." She said, "So the report could place you at Alpha and have no living witness to contradict it." I said, "Yes." She said, "Esi, I need you to write down everything you remember, every detail. Times, positions, sounds, what you said, what Felix said, what the structure felt like before you moved, all of it, on paper, now, before anything else." She said, "Then I am coming to you." I want to pause here, because lying in a medical facility with a fractured knee, reading a report that placed me 40 meters from where I actually was, and understanding what that placement might mean, is the moment this story became something I had not fully let myself think about until that Monday morning. If you have ever read something official and known with complete certainty that it was wrong, drop a comment below. And subscribe right now, because what Wiredu found when she came and what the investigation uncovered about the structure and who had access to it is the part that changes everything.
Wiredu arrived that afternoon. She read my written account. She read the official report. She placed them side by side on the table beside my bed and went through them section by section without speaking. Then she said, "The structural engineering assessment, the civilian contractor who produced it, do you know who commissioned them?" I said, "The report says the investigating officer commissioned them." She said, "The investigating officer was Captain Roland Acquois." I said, "I know Acquois. He ran safety assessments for the base last year." She said, "He also ran the structural assessment for the training building 6 months ago, before the exercise was scheduled." She said, "The civilian contractor who produced the post-accident engineering report is the same contractor Acquois used for the pre-exercise assessment." I said, "The same contractor assessed the building before the accident and after it." She said, "And found no fault in either assessment." She said it in the flat tone of someone who has identified something that requires investigation and is choosing her words accordingly. She made 3 calls from the room, all brief, all conducted quietly. Then she said, "I am referring this to Major Comfort Kusi in the investigative division. She will be here tomorrow morning. Do not speak to anyone about the position discrepancy until she has taken your statement." I said, "Wiredu, the collapse, do you think it was deliberate?" She said,
I think there are questions the official report does not answer. I think those questions need answering before we draw conclusions. She said it carefully, but she did not say no. Major Comfort Kusi arrived at 0800 the following morning. She was methodical in the way of someone who has learned that patience produces more than urgency. She took my statement in full. She reviewed the report. She reviewed my written account from the previous day. She noted the position discrepancy without comment and moved on. Over the following 6 weeks, her team worked through the building's structural history, the pre-exercise assessment, the post-accident report, the commissioning chain for the civilian contractor, Aqua's involvement at each stage. What they found:
the building had been assessed as structurally sound 6 months before the exercise. The assessment had been produced by the civilian contractor, signed off by Aqua. The post-accident assessment had found that a load-bearing support at the upper floor had failed. The failure had been attributed to material fatigue, age-related deterioration. But Kusi's team brought in an independent structural engineer, a different firm, no connection to Aqua or to the original contractor. The independent engineer's assessment was different. The load-bearing support had not failed due to age-related deterioration. It had failed because it had been compromised. A section of the support had been deliberately weakened. The weakening was not visible from the surface. It would not have been detected in a standard visual assessment, but it was present and it was not accidental. The investigation ran for 4 months. Captain Roland Aqua had commissioned the pre-exercise structural assessment, knowing the contractor would not detect the compromise he had already made to the support. He had made the compromise himself during an access visit to the building 3 weeks before the exercise. He had then supervised the post-accident assessment to ensure the finding was attributed to material fatigue rather than deliberate action. He had also assigned Felix and Sandra to the eastern section, the section directly above the compromised support, as part of his supervisory role in structuring the exercise. The assignment had appeared routine. It was not. The position discrepancy in the official report had been Aqua's work. He had written my position as Alpha because at Alpha I would have been in the collapse zone. The report had been constructed to account for 3 fatalities, not 2. My survival had not been part of his plan. I had survived because I heard something in the structure at 0911 and moved. 8 minutes, 40 meters, a concrete partition, and 6 years of knowing what structures sound like when they are about to fail. The investigation established motive in month 3. Felix Enti had been due to give evidence in a separate internal investigation into financial irregularities connected to a procurement contract, evidence that would have implicated several officers, including Aqua. Felix had been the primary witness. Sandra had been a secondary witness who had come forward after Felix.
Aqua had arranged the exercise, had compromised the structure, had assigned Felix and Sandra to the eastern section, had ensured the post-accident assessment returned a finding of material fatigue. I had been there because I was their section commander. My presence had been incidental to Aqua's plan. My death would simply have removed a complication. Aqua was arrested in month 3. He was charged with 2 counts of murder, 1 count of attempted murder, perverting the course of justice, and falsifying an official military report. He pleaded not guilty on all counts. The trial lasted 9 weeks. He was convicted on all charges. He is serving 26 years. Felix Nitti and Sandra Adu. I think about them every day, not in the way that grief works in the early weeks, that raw, constant presence, in the way that people who have been taken before their time settle into a permanent room in your thinking. Felix had been 24 years old. He had been due to give evidence that would have cost him something. He had known it would cost him something, and had given it anyway. Sandra had come forward after Felix because she believed the evidence mattered. Both of them had understood that some things are worth the risk. They had not been wrong. They had simply not known the full shape of what the risk was. I had been their section commander. I had heard a sound at 0911 and moved. I have thought many times about whether I should have pushed harder when I called out, whether I should have gone back for them rather than moving to Bravo, whether 8 minutes was enough time to bring them both across to a partition that held. Wiredu told me once that this kind of thinking is not useful. She was right. It is also unavoidable. I have learned to let it sit without trying to resolve it. Some things are for carrying. The report. The official report into the training accident was superseded by the investigation's findings. A new record was issued. Accurate positions for all three of us. Accurate timeline. Accurate account of what had happened in that structure on that morning. My position at 0919 was recorded correctly in the new document. Position Bravo, behind the partition that held. It took 4 months and a murder investigation to put me in the right place on the right page, but it is there now. Here is what a detail on page 14 taught me. Read the report, not just for what it says, for what it says about you. For whether what it says about you matches what you know to be true. Because the report is the official record, and the official record is what everything else is built on. Decisions, conclusions, what happened and what did not happen, and who was where and when. If the record is wrong about a detail, even one detail, the rest of it may not be trustworthy either. I had been placed at position Alpha. I had been at position Bravo. 40 meters, 8 minutes, a concrete partition. That detail was the thread, and I was alive to pull it. Drop a comment and tell me your story. I read every single one. And subscribe. I am here every week with a new story. She read the report. She found the detail. She did not let it go.